Hey, good Sunday evening, everybody. Welcome back. Hopefully we had a wonderful week and hopefully getting ready for what unfortunately is shaping up to be a pretty big time week here, and what is going to become Helene here very shortly, unfortunately is looking to have the potential to maybe be the storm of the year. I think so far, at least, that we've seen here in the tropics. We have had some impactful storms in the United States, but I think Helene really could take the cake here and kind of surpass what we saw with Beryl, Debbie, and Francine. And unfortunately, again, this is one that could be one that we remember for a while. So again, I don't say that to scare anybody. I just want you to be prepared because we have seen trends in the models over the last little bit here that have indicated that we could see a major hurricane make landfall into the United States by the end of this week, really within the next 4 to 5 days. So pieces are moving quickly here. A storm that obviously would bring big time impacts at the beach. Also inland could see some impacts, and we'll break all that down for you in today's video. Now, if you're new to the channel, welcome. Just to introduce myself, my name is Gerald. I am a meteorology major at the University of North Carolina, Charlotte. Again, going into my junior year here. If you're a regular on the channel, you'll know that already. I say it plenty. But again, we've had a lot of growth recently. So I just want to reintroduce you to the channel and myself, and just kind of give you an idea of who you're here and talk a lot, and not just, have some stranger in front of a camera with a bunch of maps and arrows drawn on it. Now, if you haven't already subscribed, please do so. It's a great way to stay up to date this week as the storm continues to evolve and as we continue to see some shifts in the models. Again, the forecast not completely down pat yet. We're going to need a little bit more time, but as we get closer, being subscribed is a great way to stay up to date, and hit that bell next to the subscribe button, and you'll get all of the latest notifications every time I post one here regarding, again, what is going to become potentially major hurricane Helene here this week. Also, like the video, comment, let me know where you're watching from, and consider sharing with somebody here that lives in the path of the storm, so they can also be up to date, again, with that latest information. Now, with all that said, let's go ahead and dive into it. Let's start talking about this storm, and let's break down where it's going, where it's at now, and kind of all of the ingredients at play here, with this storm system. So currently on satellite, the storm, or if you want to call it that, again, still just kind of an open, broad area of low pressure. The Invest, I guess, is probably a better way to call it. Invest 97L is its technical name here. And taking a look at current satellite imagery, it's, not the prettiest thing, but definitely getting there for sure, I think. And kind of the trend recently in the models is for the storm to develop sooner and quicker, and because of that, we're seeing higher end potential impacts upon landfall with some of these models. So the technical, center of circulation is kind of here near Honduras, actually. We're seeing, a pretty good amount of convection here on the eastern side of the storm. I do expect over the next day or two for this to become better organized, and again, we could have a storm forming in the Caribbean, then shooting the gap into the Gulf. And unfortunately, climatologically speaking, that's a recipe for disaster here for folks in and along portions of the Gulf Coast. And again, we'll talk about who that could be that sees the center of the storm. But right now on satellite, just know an area that is getting better organized, not, again, anything that is going to probably be a hurricane by tomorrow or anything, but definitely getting better organized, getting its act together, and well on its way to becoming a named storm here within the next couple of days. Now, latest from the National Hurricane Center from this afternoon, now up to an 80% chance of development within the next 7 days. But I think the bigger thing here is we went from a 10% this morning to now a 40% chance of development within the next 48 hours. So that being today or tomorrow, or even, I guess, into early Tuesday, seeing a higher end potential for development. So like I said, that has been the trend. The trend has been for this storm to form quicker and try to, have more time to get its act together before making landfall again in the United States by Thursday or Friday of this week. And again, even probably trending a little bit closer to Thursday than Friday as of late as well. Now, outside of that, over the open Atlantic, we do have a couple other areas, but really we're just going to focus on this Gulf storm today. The other areas are not really something that are showing any signs of a potential threat in the near term. So again, we're not really going to focus too much on it. All right, so let's take a look at some afternoon model guidance here. Again, this is the latest information that we have from our models, and we'll start with the GFS, and let's go ahead and back this up to Monday morning. So tomorrow morning, the latest GFS depicting this, again, open wave or this Invest out here over the Caribbean and beginning to close off a center of low pressure here, again, just off the coast of kind of Honduras here, off the coast of El Salvador, and kind of halfway between Central America and Jamaica, seeing this low pressure begin to deepen at the surface. surface. And once it forms that closed low in the GFS, it's off to the races by Monday evening. 1,001 millibar low pressure becoming a tropical storm, and overnight Monday into Tuesday, getting near the gap here. And by Tuesday afternoon, we kind of have a hurricane on our hands. Look at this, 983 millibar low pressure right between Cuba and the Yucatan Peninsula, and a storm that, again, would be pretty feisty here and could even bring, some isolated impacts to the western tip of Cuba there, and maybe even into the extreme eastern portion of the Yucatan Peninsula, kind of that little bit that juts out as this storm strengthens, and it gets up to major hurricane status by Wednesday afternoon. So we're at Sunday evening now. Within 3 days, the GFS blows this up into a major hurricane and gets this right into a primed up region of the Gulf of Mexico and continues to strengthen it through Wednesday afternoon and into Thursday. And at this point, we zoom in on the storm a little bit, and you'll notice getting dangerously close to the United States. So here we go. Again, Wednesday evening here on the GFS, a major hurricane continuing to strengthen, getting down to 936 millibars on the latest run. That would be, probably a Category 4 storm. You couldn't rule out anything, maybe a little bit stronger than that as well, with a pressure in that ballpark. And then by Thursday afternoon, a storm knocking on the doorstep here of the Florida Panhandle, and then getting landfall as a very strong major hurricane Helene during the overnight and evening hours of Thursday into the early morning hours of Friday, and then working inland into the southeast as a feisty storm for Friday afternoon, and then dissipating by next Saturday. So that's the latest GFS. And again, I know we kind of breezed through the impacts. We're going to spend time just talking about the impacts towards the end. But right now, I just want to get you familiar with the general setup we're looking at. So that was the GFS. Obviously, a concerning look for sure. Let's take a look at the European, and you're going to immediately notice some differences here. We'll back this up again to Monday. Tomorrow, at this point, the GFS had already begun to form a surface low pressure, and we had some closed off isobars. On the European, still an open wave at this point. And this is kind of, I think, something that is a bit of a bias between both models. The GFS, normally a little aggressive. The European, normally a little conservative. So take that into mind when you look at both. But the European, much slower to developing this. And we don't really get a closed center of low pressure till Tuesday afternoon. And that's whenever we begin to finally see Tropical Storm Helene take shape here. So really a full day after the GFS is whenever the European fully develops this into a system, but takes the same track, shoots us right up the gap, maybe just clipping the Yucatan Peninsula as a tropical storm overnight Tuesday into Wednesday, but then getting into the Gulf as a tropical storm here by Wednesday afternoon. And again, we'll zoom this in like we did with the GFS model, and you'll notice a feisty storm system here, a strengthening tropical storm, getting up near hurricane status to hurricane status, and we're seeing a Category 1, borderline maybe Category 2 storm here, making landfall into portions of the Panama City Beach area of Florida, and getting back towards the Big Bend as well as a 981 millibar low. And then much like the GFS, Friday afternoon, moving this up through Georgia into the Western Carolinas, seeing some active inland threats there, and then dissipating by Saturday over portions of the Ohio River Valley. So again, a bit of a different scenario in intensity, but overall track and timing very similar between both models, which is good to see that agreement between the models, but not so good on what they're agreeing on. Again, both showing big time tropical impacts here through portions of the state of Florida. I'll show you one more model, the Icon model, and we'll back this up a little bit, but really a similar scenario between both of them. Again, a 983, 84 millibar low, similar to the European, and a little bit further west than the European model here, getting into closer towards the Destin area probably compared to communities further to the east of there. So closer to the GFS track wise, but closer to the European intensity wise, and then moves us up through Alabama compared to Georgia, and then up through the Tennessee River Valley where it dissipates by Saturday. So definitely seeing some differences in the models. Let's go ahead and take a look at maybe how strong the storm could get, just off of pure ingredients. So in fact, I'm going to even pull up another map here that I did not quite pull up on the fly here. So give me 1 second and we will take a look at this. Since this is just for this storm anyway, we might as well go ahead and take the time to do it. Let's find it. All right, Western Atlantic. Let's take a look at these sea surface temperatures because, again, this is one of the ingredients for tropical development that is very important. So there's going to kind of be a checklist here for a strengthening system. If you're a tropical system, a depression, a storm, a hurricane, a cyclone, a typhoon, wherever you are in the world, there's three main ingredients you want to kind of strengthen yourself. Number one is warm ocean temperatures at the surface, and preferably, if you can get it, kind of even deeper than the surface. Basically, the reason it's a tropical system is it is completely warm cored and forms completely off of just latent heat release from the ocean and just kind of a positive feedback loop that begins that creates the storm system. So again, no fronts are there to create it. It's just pure heat energy in the ocean. So that's one thing you want. The second thing you want is calm winds. You do not want a lot of wind shear. You want your storms to be able to fire up and develop and continue to maintain themselves without getting sheared one way or the other. That helps to drop the pressure in the storm. Again, the stronger the storms around the center, the deeper the pressure drops, the higher the winds go. Again, just a positive feedback loop. So that's the second thing you want. The third thing you want is plenty of moist air around you. You don't want to have to be fighting with dry air. You want, again, a very moist environment to work with, again, to help promote that thunderstorm growth, which again helps promote lower pressure and higher wind speed, like I just mentioned. So let's go ahead and go through this checklist with this storm system with Helene. I'll go ahead and draw on the map here in black. This is kind of where the storm is currently. Again, I'll just circle it. And then I will take, or I'll kind of draw what the expected general path is of the storm, give or take a little bit. So again, this is kind of just a general mean of all the models of the line I just drew. And you'll notice the storm currently already in very warm waters and going to go right through some of the warmest waters in the Atlantic Ocean between the North Atlantic and the South Atlantic. These are some of the warmest ocean temperatures in the Atlantic. And unfortunately, again, that is going to promote big time strengthening for this storm system. Also, I didn't pull up the map, but the ocean heat content, meaning how deep is the warm water, is also really deep right into this section of the Gulf that this storm is expected to track right through. So unfortunately, again, that's going to be something that is very conducive for development with the storm system. Let's take a look at some other ingredients. What about that moisture? Again, at the beginning of its life cycle, where it's currently at plenty of moisture here into the Western Caribbean, some dry air into the Gulf of Mexico where it's moving, but currently nothing really stopping it from developing. And then eventually it gets into the Gulf of Mexico and again kind of brings some of this moisture with it, even though there is some dry air in the vicinity. Now, I think right here is a great time to pause really quickly and just mention a very important caveat in the storm. That is, when does the center of circulation get its act together? We looked at intensity differences between the European and the GFS. The GFS much stronger, mainly because it gets the core formed and gets it quite tightly wound here in the Caribbean. So when it moves into the Gulf, where there's a little bit more dry air and shear, it's more capable of fighting that off. Again, it takes longer to kind of disrupt a stronger storm than a weaker storm, and that's why we're seeing big time pressure differences, even though here towards the end of the life cycle you are seeing some dry air kind of get brought into the storm here. Again, it's a stronger core, it's more tightly wound, and it's going to be harder to disrupt, so it's going to take more than a little bit of dry air to kind of mess with it, like you see here on the GFS, where if I switch this to the European model, assuming that will load properly, looks like it will, whoop-de-doo. Again, you'll notice a weaker storm, so that dry air really wraps into it a little bit quicker here and does more damage to it. Again, just due to how different the core is at that point whenever it gets into a harsher, more harsh environment. Now, another thing to watch for is wind shear, like I talked about, and I'll kind of explain this map a little bit as we go, but generally speaking, the brighter the colors you see, the less favorable it is for tropical development. So we'll move this ahead. This is overnight Monday into Tuesday. Here's the storm system, and you're noticing, well, we've got some brighter colors here to the north. Does that mean the storm's getting sheared? Yes, but also no. It also matters the vectors of these streamlines. When I say streamline, I just mean one of these kind of arrows that you see on the map. You see all these little lines. Those are just streamlines or kind of wind vectors if you want to look at it that way. And up here at 200 millibars in the higher levels of the atmosphere, we kind of actually have some divergence aloft. So, that's helping to kind of push these streamlines out from the storm system, which helps to fan it out. What that also does is creates a void at the surface, and that creates creates convergence, which creates that rising air after it and helps promote this tropical system to further strengthen. So again, in the near term, very favorable conditions, and that's why the GFS is really ramping this thing up so quickly. Now, I'll mention towards, again, the end of the life cycle, we see a little bit more wind shear beginning to interact here, and we're no longer seeing the winds kind of fanning out. We're seeing the winds blowing over the storm a little bit more here, which would indicate a little bit more of shear that could help disrupt the center of the storm. So, like I mentioned, the GFS showing 935 millibars, showing a very strong hurricane, Category 4, Category 5. While that's not something I want to rule out by any means, I do think it's going to have some challenges getting there towards landfall. Now up to Wednesday into Thursday, maybe even the first half of Thursday, conditions look pretty prime for tropical development and strengthening. But on final approach, I think the wind shear is going to kick up a little bit and the dry air is going to kick up a little bit. So what is going to be very important again is how strong is that core of the storm at that point, and will it be able to withstand some of those harsher ingredients that kind of get pumped into the environment here. So talking about the track here, this is something that has become much more clear over the last little bit. Again, I think a couple days ago, we didn't really know where in the Gulf this was going to go. Now we're feeling much more confident. We are going to have kind of this cutoff low pressure over portions of Oklahoma and Arkansas. And basically, that combined with a ridge here of high pressure is going to work into tandem pretty good here to kind of scoop up the storm, pull it northward, likely towards the Florida Panhandle. Again, you folks in Mississippi, Alabama, even extreme eastern Louisiana here and west coast of Florida. It's going to be somewhere in here. We feel pretty confident about that. And I think we feel even more confident that it's likely going to be into this region somewhere. I think from maybe Biloxi, Mississippi, all the way back through the Big Bend of Florida is the most likely area for landfall right now. If you're outside of there, I'll draw another circle here. If you're in this blue area, I would still very much watch it. Again, the path can change, it can shift, but specifically if you're in that black area I circled, I think that's going to be the highest probability of seeing landfall into that region. Again, due to this upper level low and ridge, is how they're going to work together, pulling the storm north and again, working it likely again into the Florida Panhandle somewhere. Although, like I mentioned, regions surrounding watch out. Now, as the storm moves inland, again, it's kind of going to get wrapped around this this cutoff low. It's going to run into a ridge of high pressure and kind of get shredded apart pretty quickly once it hits the Appalachia chain here. But before it gets there, again, could cause plenty of trouble in the long run. So because of that, again, the model's in much higher agreement here for a potential track. We take a look at the latest European ensembles. And again, a very tight focus here from the Florida Panhandle through the Big Bend being the highest likelihood of that landfall, and most of these members getting this up to a Category 1 storm, at least in intensity. And then as we work it inland, again, likely curving off towards the north and then eventually the northwest eventually. So again, it did look like maybe the storm could hit Florida, curve up the Carolina coastline. I think that's a less likely scenario now. I do think this is probably going to curve inland once it does hit here, probably through Georgia or Alabama. Maybe if we get a further east solution, could curve up through the Carolinas. But I do think it's probably going to be a one landfall kind of storm, not looking like multiple landfalls at this point in time. We take a look at the GFS and its ensemble members from this afternoon. You notice, again, a couple members try to maybe move this up the Carolina coastline, but a much less likely scenario than a landfall somewhere into the Florida Panhandle. And I'll mention a lot of GFS members keep you folks into Alabama, Mississippi, on high alert here. Again, a pretty good spread here from kind of the Alabama coastline to the Big Bend of Florida, seeing that highest level of kind of convergence here between these ensemble members. Also, like I'll mention, or you saw in the operational runs, I should say, a much higher end strength on the GFS and its ensembles compared to the European and its ensembles. So a couple things to note there between the models and some differences. All right, I don't want to get too deep on the impacts yet because, again, I think we're a little too far still to go super in-depth, but we will take a look at a couple models, the European and the GFS, starting with the GFS, and we'll take a look at some wind speeds because there's a couple points to highlight here. One, obviously, the differences in strength between the models show different wind speed maximums, I guess. Also, the size of the storm is something that we really need to focus on. These Central American gyre systems usually are pretty large in nature, and I think the storm looks maybe a little bit smaller in the models than it did a couple days ago, but still a large hurricane nonetheless, bigger than your average hurricane. And you can see that here. The latest GFS with its wind gust forecast. Again, these are not sustained winds. These are wind gusts at the surface or just above the surface. Let's kind of take a look at what happens here. So this is getting into Thursday morning. And if I just circle the tropical storm wind field here, you'll notice that this is a large storm system. I mean, this is covering up almost from the Florida Keys back towards, the extreme southwestern part of Louisiana. It has that tropical storm wind field. So a big time storm and some problems that brings is one, obviously more people are going to see the wind because it's a bigger wind field. Two, storm surge is going to be amplified. You have much bigger area of that wind energy. That's going to move the ocean more effectively across a larger area. So more people feeling a storm surge effect, more people feeling a wind effect. Also, obviously, the rain would be, in a bigger area, more people seeing the rain effect. So all around, larger storms are generally more problematic for more people. Now, the good news with a large storm, if there is any good news, is because that wind field gets spread out more, the kind of center of the storm isn't necessarily as, I guess there's not as sharp of a gradient between the strength of the storm is what I should say. So the center of the storm probably isn't as different from 100 miles out from the center just because of kind of the way that these storms work. And you'll notice that here with the wind from the storm. I mean, there's a big gradient here of pretty similar wind speeds from the center outward. So here we go. This is Thursday afternoon, the peak or kind of the core of the storm beginning to move ashore. And at this point, winds would begin to gust into tropical storm and hurricane strength for much of the Florida Panhandle. Eventually, we would get landfall sometime Thursday evening, and this is when the worst of the storm will move ashore. This is when we could potentially, again, not definitely set in stone, but could potentially see major hurricane force wind gusts, big time storm surge, again, maybe upwards of 10 feet with a situation like this. And I don't want to rule out even higher storm surge than that, depending on the strength of the storm. But nonetheless, storm surge nonetheless will get more in depth on how much surge and exactly where as we get closer. But I think somebody in the Florida Panhandle is going to see storm surge even onto portions of the east coast of Florida, back up towards the Savannah area. Again, this is a big storm, so you're going to even see some wind coming off the Atlantic here at pretty feisty numbers that could bring some surge problems. And then the storm moves inland. And again, a bigger storm, a bigger wind field, we're going to see inland impacts as well. This is pretty similar. It reminds me of Irma. I went through Irma in the Western Carolinas in high school or middle school. I can't quite remember which one. But either way, it had a big time wind field. This one could be similar where a lot of folks in the southeast see some wind gusts to tropical storm strength overnight Thursday into Friday afternoon. And look at this. I mean, by Friday morning, we've got big time tropical storm wind gusts getting all the way up into North Georgia, into the Western Carolinas, and then kind of dying out through Friday afternoon, but staying gusty throughout the day, and then finally calming down by the weekend. So again, that's just one model. That's the GFS. Let's take a look at the European. And again, a weaker storm, but you get the point. We still have big time impacts. Large wind field here Thursday. Widespread tropical storm strength through much of the state of Florida as the storm works inland. Hurricane force wind gusts moving into the Florida Big Bend, seeing storm surge. And look at these inland wind gusts. I mean, this is big time wind gusts here for Friday morning. And again, it was a weaker system than the GFS, but look at how these winds carry inland, still gusting up into tropical storm strength here from Thursday into Friday afternoon. And again, it being or continuing even into the Western Carolinas. And unfortunately, something I'm concerned about here, not necessarily for direct impacts, but we're getting into peak fall foliage season, and this could really mess with it here through the mountains of North Carolina, through the Smokies, through North Georgia. Unfortunately, this, again, really could play havoc on that fall foliage forecast. Also, obviously, power outages would be a concern, which is probably a bigger deal than the fall foliage getting messed up, obviously. But something we're gonna want to watch for Thursday into Friday. And then again, I think by Saturday afternoon, conditions improve for a lot of people. Rainfall numbers through the southeast, a lot of it on the way. The good news, this is a relatively quickly moving system, so we are going to get a band of some pretty heavy rainfall wherever the center of the storm goes. Again, this map shows it kind of over Georgia. That could shift to Alabama. That could shift further towards the Carolinas. It's going to wobble back and forth some, but either way, someone over the southeast is going to get big-time rainfall totals. I think the west coast of Florida is going to get some pretty big-time rainfall totals as you're going to have prolonged periods of onshore flow with some banding. And folks, probably going to get more than half a foot of rain somewhere, maybe upwards of a foot of rain in isolated spots. Final thing I'll talk about here before I let you go, and then we'll do it all again tomorrow morning with another video. We are looking at a severe weather threat with this as well. Just taking a look at the supercell composite here. Obviously, as the storm makes landfall, we're going to actually, let me switch this because we're on a different thing. So let's change it to storm relative helicity. I think this might do a slightly better job of showing kind of the overall ingredients here. So here comes the storm. Basically, just note what this is showing is a lot of spin in the atmosphere as this moves, inland. And bringing plenty of potential tornado threat with it. So I think Friday afternoon or Thursday even, Thursday along the Gulf Coast, Florida, maybe in Alabama as well, depending on track. But Friday morning and afternoon and evening, I am concerned about an inland tornado threat through portions of Georgia, South Carolina, potentially Alabama, North Carolina. We'll wait and see when we get there. But just know, again, we pull this into Friday afternoon. This is a lot of spin in the atmosphere. And if I just take a quick sounding here, just to kind of get a look at this, a lot of spin. So we'll see how much instability there is to work with this spin, but something we're going to want to watch for sure anyway as we continue to monitor this storm system. Alrighty, well, again, got a lot of information out there for you here on this Sunday evening. It's going to be a busy week, so go ahead, stay prepared. Great way to do it. Again, hit that subscribe button, hit the bell for the latest notifications, like the video, and share it with somebody that you think might find it useful if they're in the path of this storm. Alrighty, folks, have a wonderful rest of your Sunday. Have a blessed one, and I'll see you all tomorrow.